So thank you again for joining us this evening. My name is Rigo Palacios, manager for the Office of Family Engagement. And tonight's webinar is focused on English learners and their journey towards language proficiency here in San Jose Unified School District. The objectives that we will be covering today are the identification of English learners, the process for how we do that. Focus a little bit of time, or most of our time actually, on the language development instruction, and then touch upon reclassification, what that means, and how that process works for our students. So to begin, providing a little bit of context here with regard to our English learner students, this is a snapshot from a dashboard that we have access to monitor the number of English learners and also the progress of our English learners over the course of the school year. So we currently have 5,222 students in San Jose Unified who are considered English learners. Of those 5,222, 108 students have a 504 plan, which is a plan that provides additional supports and accommodations based on a need that the student has demonstrated to support them or that may be hindering their learning. Of those 5,222, 1,084 students have an IEP or an individualized education plan that similar to a 504, but is a little bit more extensive, provides supports for the students based again on a learning disability, a learning challenge, or another impairment that may be getting in the way of the students' progress. So 1,084 of our students have an IEP that are also English learners. Next, we have students that are at risk, LTEL, which stands for long-term English learner. These are students who have been in our system for 4+ years. When students at that point are continuing to demonstrate difficulty with acquiring language development or progressing in their language development, additional supports are put in place to ensure that we're supporting that development of language. But however, they are considered at risk because they have been in our system for quite some time. So we have 463 students that currently are receiving additional support, not to the level of needing a 504 or IEP plan, but are receiving additional support for the language development. And then 1,312 students are long-term English learners who have been in our school district, again, 4+ years, who are still acquiring English. And then outside of the current English learner population, we have 1,749 students currently enrolled in San Jose Unified who have reached the status of being reclassified. So RFEP stands for Reclassified Fluent English Proficient. These are students who have met criteria that I'll present to you a little bit later on in this presentation. And once students achieve that criteria, we monitor them for a period of years to ensure that they continue progressing in the different domains of language that we'll again present as well. So those students have exited the English learner status, but are being monitored to ensure that they continue moving forward. And the next number here, the RFEP fully exited, are the number of students currently enrolled in San Jose Unified who have gone through met the reclassification criteria, were monitored for a period of years, and have now fully exited that monitoring period because they have successfully continued to demonstrate that they have met or exceeded their criteria for being considered fully English proficient. So a little bit of context there for us, to keep in mind as we're discussing our English learners. And then the 1,932 number that we have there are students who, when they initially arrive in San Jose Unified, either in kindergarten or from another country or from outside of the district, these are students who are coming to us with a first language other than English. But when they assess initially, they assess at a level that demonstrates very close to grade level proficiency in English, so they're not considered English learners. So we have quite a few students who come in with enough knowledge and mastery of the language to be considered initially fluent English proficient. And then the final number we have here is a number of students who are English only, first language English, who come into the district not needing those language support. So again, these numbers are to provide some context. So when we're discussing English learners throughout, you have an idea of the number of students that we're looking at when we're discussing the supports. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time describing the English learner identification process and kind of what that looks like and how early that starts for our students. So the process for identifying a student and their primary language begins way back when they first enroll in San Jose Unified. So the process starts at the time of enrollment, and part of the enrollment process includes completing, the necessary paperwork, and within that paperwork is a home language survey that the families complete. And we use the responses and information from that brief survey to determine if we need to administer a language assessment to the student. Districts are required to identify English learner students in a timely manner to make sure that we're providing language assistance services as soon as possible. California Education Code directs students to determine the languages spoken in the home of each student. And again, this process begins at the district's place of enrollment to identify the language needs as early as possible. Home language surveys are designed to identify potential English learners and to allow us to assess and determine appropriate placement and supports at their school site. So these are the questions that appear on the home language survey, which are required by California Education Code. And the answers provided for each of the questions are then used to determine a student's home language status, which may be English only or possible English learner. To determine a student's home language status, there are established guidelines that all districts follow to ensure that we are we're all on the same page with regard to how we're identifying our students. So the first three questions are the ones that are most heavily emphasized. And so we see those outlined here in the red box. Responses of all English on home language, on the home language survey questions 1 through 3 result in the student considered as English only. So if their first language, the first language they spoke, the primary language the student speaks at home, and then the language that is most frequently used with students, if all three of those come back as English, then they're considered to be an English only student. If at least one response, however, other than English is marked on one of those three questions, the student is marked as a possible English learner. And what happens then is that a student who is designated or who's identified as a possible English learner, they are designated as possibly having a primary language other than English, and then a referral is made for our assessment department to administer a language assessment to the student. The assessment usually takes place within 30 calendar days of the student's enrollment, and the student's language classification will be changed from pending to either initially fluent if they pass the assessment the first time, or English learner, depending on the results of the test. And then the student will be placed in the appropriate educational program based on the results of the initial language testing. If a language other than English is marked on questions 4 or 5, but not on the first 3 questions, the student may be marked as English only and placed in the district's general program. The language spoken most often by adults at home or caregivers doesn't necessarily determine the native language proficiency of the student. However, the school or district may administer a language assessment at their discretion upon receiving additional information, or if the family, shares additional information that may prompt the school or district to assess, regardless of all English having been denoted on the first 3 questions. So for the most part, again, it's very straightforward, but here and there, depending on information shared by the family, that determination may be made by the school or by the district. So as an example, let's suppose these are the responses on the student's home language survey. In this case, the student is considered to possibly have a primary language other than English because we have responses for a different language, Spanish in this case, which is represented by the S, for two of the questions. So the student will be referred for a language assessment in this particular case. In this next example, we have a sample survey where the first three questions we have responses of all English. There is a response of Spanish for the final question regarding the language used at a preschool or childcare provider for the child. But because the first three questions are have responses of all English, the student would be considered an English only student. And again, unless the family shared additional information to where perhaps the child has been with the child care provider since birth, and the family feels that there's been a significant amount of Spanish utilized with the student to where there may be, a need for additional language support, then the school or the district at that time can, based on that information, make that determination and refer the student for a language assessment to determine if there are any supports necessary. So based on the results of the survey, the student will be referred to take a language assessment to determine their language proficiency. And then based on the assessment results, the student may be deemed initially proficient, again, if they pass the first assessment, or an English learner. The student can then be provided the proper supports when they are assigned to their school and to their classroom. The assessment for newly enrolled students in a U.S. school, just to reiterate, must be administered within 30 days. Sometimes students enroll in our schools coming directly from another district as an English learner already, and an additional assessment may not be necessary. However, if the student is new to the United States, or if for any reason there are no language scores received for the student, that does happen from time to time when students move, very frequently. The information may not move along with all of the schools or may not catch up to the students for a period of time. So in those cases, the students would be assessed with us so that we can determine the proper placement. So within 30 calendar days of initial enrollment, each student whose home language is other than English, as determined by the survey, must be assessed if they're referred for English proficiency by means of the current English language proficiency assessment. In California, we use the English language proficiency assessments for California, otherwise known as the LPAC. And there are various versions of the LPAC. Newly enrolled students will be given what is called the initial assessment. All students who are currently enrolled and returning English learner students must be assessed for English language proficiency annually with the annual LPAC. So the first time they take it, it's the initial LPAC. Every time thereafter, if they continue taking it, it's the annual. And the annual LPAC measures their progress in English language development over the course of a school year. Every student who is an English learner and has an active individual education plan, or IEP, or a 504 plan must be annually assessed for English language proficiency, while also being provided the accommodations, modifications, or alternate assessments for the LPAC as specified in the student's IEP or Section 504 plan. So during the school year, English language students, English learner students are receiving instruction in the core academic areas, just as every other student. So they're receiving math, they're receiving physical education, science, as well as additional supports to help them develop English language. The language assessments allow us to measure their progress compared to other English learners in San Jose Unified and across the state. The assessment we use to measure language, as mentioned previously, is the LPAC, the English Language Proficiency Assessment for California. And this test provides school staff and parents information about a child's progress as they are acquiring English. And it also allows us to learn more about how to best support your child at school, and to provide you feedback as to how they can be supported at home as they move towards language proficiency. When a student takes the LPAC, they will be tested in 4 areas, which we call domains. And those 4 domains are reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The LPAC scores are reported back as levels, and there are two types of LPAC assessments, which I had mentioned already. The initial LPAC, which is given the first time the student assesses, and that one is scored from level 1 being the lowest to level 3 being the highest. And the annual LPAC is scored from level 1 to 4, with 1 being the lowest and 4 being the highest. The initial LPAC is given to all incoming kindergarten and new students to San Jose Unified at all grades if there is no previous LPAC or no previous English learner designation on file. Students who are new to the country with no previous U.S. instruction will most likely take the initial LPAC after enrolling in a California school. When possible, our assessment office here at San Jose Unified will contact families to schedule appointments for summer language testing prior to the new school year beginning. And then schools receive the results so they can place students in appropriate classes and ensure that the appropriate supports are provided as needed for language development. In situations where students are unable to make the summer appointment, or perhaps they enroll very close to the start of the school year, or perhaps even during the school year, then that is when the school will take on the assessment and ensure that it happens within that 30-day time frame after beginning at the new school. The initial LPAC is only taken one time, so again, that's the first time they take it. If a student passes the initial LPAC language assessment, therefore when they take it, the student is then considered initially proficient, and they will not be placed in language development support classes due to their what they've demonstrated on the assessment, their proficient status. However, if a student does not pass the assessment, they will be provided language development support and will take an annual assessment each year until they pass the assessment and can be reclassified, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. So that is the initial LPAC. For all students who did not pass the initial LPAC, then they must thereafter, until they demonstrate proficiency, must take the annual LPAC assessment. And the LPAC scores are monitored annually to ensure that students are making progress of at least one LPAC level per academic year. The assessment is taken once a year, typically in the months of February to May. That's the window for the assessment. And the assessment will occur during school hours. San Jose Unified will be sending communication out as we get closer to the assessment period so that families are aware that the assessment window is opening up and what to expect with regard to the assessment. And even though the window is open from February to May, the actual assessment dates will be communicated by the school. Depending on the number of English learners, some schools may take that entire window of time to assess because they have so many English learners. Other schools may take a shorter period of time because they have fewer English learners at their school site. But again, more of those specifics will be shared as we approach that window by the district and also by the school site. So the LPAC test includes subtests in the 4 domains that we saw previously: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Each subtest may take place in one day or over a few days, depending on the student responses or the length of the test. The test will vary in complexity by the grade level that the student is in, and tests are administered by trained staff and or the classroom teacher. For our younger students in grades K, kinder and first, the assessments are typically given in a one-to-one setting. So there'll be the student and the teacher or the adult administering the assessment. For students in grades 2 and above, there will be a combination of individual and group assessments. Assessments are a combination of paper pencil and digital response tests. Teachers and staff provide support for the students, especially younger students for whom working with the computer is too challenging. So the student may provide the response and the adult may enter the response physically with the tablet or the Chromebook that is utilized, again, depending on the student's proficiency with using the technology. So after the assessment is taken, we receive results. And so schools and districts can expect to see results Usually within a few days of the test being submitted to the state when we're discussing the initial LPAC. Again, that one is given within 30 days. And so we usually get a pretty quick turnaround on the assessment results so we can then place the student and provide the appropriate supports in the classroom. And when students take the annual assessment, schools can expect to receive results by summer or fall. So again, the annual assessment will be taken February through May. And because there are many more students, the assessment is much longer. We usually don't get results until much later for our students. What you see on your screen here is an example of an assessment report that you may receive. The notification includes an overall score, explanation of the scores, what the numbers mean, and then a description of the level at which the student is currently performing. Reports are sent via Parent Square, or an announcement is typically sent via Parent Square to families when the scores are ready, and with instructions on where to access them. And usually these reports are available in the parent portal application that our families have access to. The ideal growth that we're looking for is that students are advancing at least one level each year. However, reaching proficiency in a new language can take anywhere from 5 to 7 years, and the rigor of the test does increase as they progress through the grades. So there may be years where they do not grow enough to advance to a new level, but in that case, what we do is we look for growth within the levels. So on the in the example on your screen there, we have on the very left-hand side the score for this student who scored at level 3. And we see there that there are score ranges for each of the levels. So when a student is not able to move from one level to another, at the very least, what we're looking for is that the score within that level is progressing each year. If we don't see progress in the score, then that's when we take a look a little bit more deeply at what might be getting in the way and how we can support the student. But if the student is showing that growth within the levels, again, that is encouraging progress that they will likely continue to progress and advance. Besides these official reports that you'll be receiving, parents will also receive notification of their child's language status annually. So as long as your child is continued to be considered an English learner, then you will be informed of that at the beginning of the year to ensure that you understand, their status and the supports that your student may be receiving. These notification letters are typically sent within the first 30 school days of each year. I wasn't able to get a response from our assessment department prior to the presentation this evening as to whether the notifications had already gone out for this school year. We're close to the 30-day time frame here. So if you haven't already received it and your child is currently an English learner, you should be receiving a notification soon. And it may be via Parent Square. A Parent Square notification with a link to a letter. And the letter, again, is to let you know the results of the annual LPAC that students took last spring if they're a returning student. And it also includes scores, an explanation of the program options, and the supports that it should be available to your child for English language acquisition. The letter also includes the criteria for language proficiency and includes assessment information in math and language arts as well. So you get a pretty complete picture there of how your student is progressing overall. So again, if you haven't already received that notification, it should be coming very soon to inform you of your child's status and those supports that they should be receiving. So with our English learners, as we saw in the when I shared the numbers that we have across the district, we have various levels of English proficiency within our English learner students. We have newcomers, who are students that are new or recent immigrants to the country. They typically possess very little to no English, not having had English instruction prior to arriving. And most of the time, these are students who have been exposed to English for no more than 2 years. They may possess conversational, some social English, but very limited academic English. Reclassified English learners are students who have reached the criteria for English language proficiency, and they are most commonly reclassified in grades 4 to 6. That's when we see many of our students um, achieving those criteria to be able to be reclassified. And then we have long-term English learners that have been in our school systems. And I think earlier I made a mistake. I said 4+ years. It's actually 6+ years. So students who have been in our school system for 6 or more years, but are still limited with their English proficiency. They may be very fluent conversationally, but still struggle with academic English. And these students are most commonly found in grades 6 through 12, again, having been here with us for quite some time at that point. So the way that we support students in the classroom, both in their general education or in their general academic classes, and also with the focus language instruction, is by providing English language instructional supports. And these can look one of two different ways. So designated ELD is a period of time that is set aside during the regular school day, where the focus is specifically on language development. So the state of California has adopted English language development standards that are created for teachers to be able to support students with the specific, again, English language development skills that are necessary for them to then be able to access the content in English for general language arts, for math, for science, for social studies, etc. So designated, again, is a protected time, a very specific set aside time during the school day where that happens. Aside from that, when students are in their math class, in their science class, in their social studies class, perhaps in an art class, the goal there is for the teachers to also integrate some English language development within their general content. So integrated English language development occurs when those English language development standards are used in tandem with the state adopted academic standards in math and other content areas. So the teachers provide some supports during the general class time as they are working on the specific content that they are teaching. So here again, we see the image of the ELD class that works as the puzzle piece that connects the other content areas. So our students, again, are enrolled in math, social studies, and other content areas, but it's that very specific instruction that happens in English language development, which for many of our students, especially newcomers and our very early English learners who are acquiring language, that's the class that is going to unlock their ability to access the content, because that's where they're developing that foundational language that will then allow them to have conversations in those other classes and understand and read the content and learn more about the concepts in English that they're learning in the other classes. There are a couple ways in which the designated ELD occurs, and we'll start by looking at what it looks like at the elementary level. So at schools with larger numbers of English learners, designated ELD will be a 45-minute block during the school day where students are regrouped based on their LPAC assessment level. So again, the annual LPAC is scored in anywhere from level 1 to 4. And so for schools that have a larger number of English learner students, they attempt to regroup those students so that in an ideal situation, you would have a classroom with all level 1 students where you can focus instruction in that area, and then a level 2 class, level 3, etc. However, depending on staffing, depending on the number of students, it's not always possible to group it that specifically. So the goal there then is to combine across no more than 2 levels, so that perhaps you have instruction for students that are at levels 1 or 2, or perhaps 2 to 3, or 3 and 4. So that way the instruction approximates their developmental level for language. So due to regrouping, students may receive English language, because they are being regrouped, students may receive that English language development from their primary teacher, or they may receive it from another teacher. But during that period of time, everybody's doing ELD. So all of the teachers are instructing at the level for those specific students. The language instruction is designed around designated ELD unit plans. So these are specific English language development unit plans that are provided to teachers based on the state standards. And standards are thematic, or the unit plans are thematic. So it integrates other subjects. So the students are learning how to how to utilize language, learning from anything from simple grammar to functions of language, using language perhaps to describe, using language um, to explain, but it's integrated with other subjects. So they may do that as they're, working on a science standard, or it might be another standard that, they integrated with. So it's not just, dry language. The lessons are collaborative as well, which allow for students to practice also speaking the language. So reading and writing is important, but that speaking of language also supports with that language development. And then there are also various supports that are provided by the teachers to ensure that the students are acquiring the language and the vocabulary necessary. So that is for schools where we have larger numbers of English learners. At schools with smaller number of English learners, the designated English language development looks a bit different. So at these school sites, because there are fewer students, the designated ELD time is 15 minutes per day. And because there are fewer students, it's not possible to regroup. So, you might have schools where there are 2 to 3 English learners per class. And so where you're looking at grade 1 or grade 2, you're looking at 10 to perhaps 12 or 15 students, if that, in that are English learners. So regrouping doesn't work because of the number of students. So the teacher then will work with students in a one-on-one setting or in a small group. At some school sites where there is, there's flexibility with staffing, a reading teacher or a reading specialist may pull the students for that small group to provide that English language development instruction. But again, they will receive it at least for 15 minutes a day in those settings. Again, the language instruction is focused on the areas of language development that the teacher has identified for the students. And they will also use the unit plans that the teachers in the designated ELD will use. But again, there'll be shorter lessons that will practice those specific skills that they need to advance. So both within the designated English language development time and then the other content areas throughout the course of the day, students are receiving some kind of language support throughout. And again, that should be happening all day, every day across other content areas such as math, science, and social studies. The photo in the top left shows us the child receiving support from an adult as they're learning to ride the bike. And for those who have had experience with either bike riding or teaching how to ride a bike, at some point prior to this, the training wheels were removed, and the goal is for the child to eventually ride the bike independently. So the concept for the learning supports that we sometimes call scaffolds in the classroom is very similar. The teachers use language supports that over time, we hope students need less and less because they're acquiring and learning how to master the language. So they may use supports such as the sentence frames that are in the top middle photo. So these sentence frames may vary in complexity. We see that the first one, the array has blank rows and blank columns, has just 2 words missing, right? So as the students are learning that scaffold or using that scaffold, which is most likely for students who have more limited English language development, they're essentially just filling in the blanks, there. For the second example, the addition equation may require, a phrase for them to complete it. And then for the third example there are blank and blank. The student is expected to provide a little bit more with the frame. So there are varying levels of sentence frames that are provided in math and in other content areas. And again, as the students are developing language more and more, the frame provides less and the student is expected to provide more based on their language development. We also have the photo in the top right that is, or towards the right-hand side, it's a math visual chart that is intending to build vocabulary. So again, there are visuals there are numbers, help the students understand, what does equal groups mean? There's a definition there. the definition of an array with visual examples to help the students build that vocabulary that they need. Again, in this particular case for mathematics, as well as the concepts. And it helps them make connections to the meaning of the vocabulary and the concepts when they receive these language supports. And again, as they progress, the hope is that the students will rely less and less on the scaffolds, and then they're able to begin producing their own language independently. At the secondary level, we're looking at middle and high school. The same expectation exists, so we're still providing designated English language development during a set time during the school day. And teachers are also expected to continue integrating those language supports over the course of the day in conjunction with their content instruction, their math, their social studies, and science. However, the way it's delivered is a little bit different from what we saw at the elementary schools. So in middle schools, there are specific newcomer courses that are provided to students. So the way this looks is that the students will be provided an additional period of English language development, or they may have 2 periods of English language development to support with that language acquisition and the reading in English, and these are built into their schedule. These courses are designed to build knowledge and proficiency of the language. Students will still have space in their schedule for other grade level courses, including electives. And students do work through curriculum that is specifically designed for English language development. This is what the teachers will use. At the elementary level, we saw that they used English language development unit plans. And at the secondary level, they will use already developed curriculum that is designed to include vocabulary, language functions, grammar, reading and writing, while still providing access to the Common Core academic learning standards. So again, they'll integrate it with science or with history to ensure that they're practicing it in a context that still provides also academic instruction in addition to the language. For students who have been with us for a little bit longer, so 4 years plus, they also continue receiving support as needed. So in this situation, we see that students who have been with us for a little bit longer may receive a 1-period class as opposed to 2 that we saw with the newcomer students. But the class again is designed to help access the academic language as they work through the core academic standards. So where the newcomer class might be more focused on those foundational, this class, again, will still support the students by providing some additional help in developing the language, but it'll be closer to what the students would be getting in the general English language arts class. The curriculum for students, again, very similar to what we saw previously, is designed to provide access to the grade level content, but at the same time providing the language support that they need in order for them to do so. So coming back to this image, again, the supports that students receive in English language development, whether it's at the elementary level to the secondary level, is very specific and very focused on the specific skills that are required to develop their language. And that in turn will then help them access the content in science and math, language arts, and the other subjects over the course of the school year. And again, as they're progressing with their English language development, then over their the longer periods of time that they are working through those content areas, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school. So that is the purpose of the English language development class, and the goals that are set for the students there. So when a student has progressed significantly to the point where they meet certain criteria, then they can be considered for reclassification from English learner status to fluent English proficiency status. So the LPAC score that we discussed previously helps us indicate or helps us identify how close the student is to being reclassified to an English proficient student, in addition to the instructional supports and the feedback that we get from teachers. All English learners are working towards reclassification because that means that they are able to demonstrate English language proficiency. Reclassification shows that they have achieved comparable achievement in English, in the English language with peers in their grade level. And then reclassification also opens up more opportunities as students can access more class content with their increased understanding of English. And it also allows more flexibility in their schedules as they reach middle or high school, since they will no longer need language support classes. And again, it opens up, in the case of students who would be taking two English language development periods, it opens up a class for them to take an elective such as, art or music or something else that they otherwise may have been more limited in taking because of the additional language support that they had. These are the criteria for reclassification to English proficiency in elementary school. The reclassification review periods typically occur in the fall after districts receive the LPAC scores from the previous spring. So when we receive the scores, if a student received a passing score of a 4 when they took the assessment this previous spring, then they become eligible for the reclassification process. The district and the schools will work together once the students are identified to determine if the students have met the criteria established here. So we're looking at, again, in step 1 there, or the first criteria point is that the student scores at level 4 on the annual LPAC assessment. If that's the case, then we move on to step 2, where we take a look at the students' reading or writing, so basic skills in English. And they have 3 opportunities there to meet the criteria for point number 2. So we can either look at their WPA, which is a writing assessment that they take annually, so the writing performance assessment. If they scored a 9 or higher on the previous spring's assessment in conjunction with that 4 on the LPAC, that would be sufficient to satisfy number 2. If they didn't meet that score of 9 on the writing assessment, they still can score a score of 3 on the ISIP test, which is a reading assessment that they take. And I believe this one is taken monthly by students. So if they scored a 9 on writing and aren't eligible through that assessment, they can still meet the criteria by scoring a 3 or higher on the reading assessment. And then for students in grades 4 or 5 who took the state assessments, the SBAC, the Smarter Balance assessments that were administered in the spring, that is a third way that they can meet that criteria as well. So there are 3 different ways to meet that second criteria for reclassification. If the student meets the first 2 points of criteria, then the third point is the teacher evaluation. So the teacher essentially provides feedback on whether, based on what they're seeing in the language arts class and reading, and then the English skills that the student is demonstrating. If the student is scoring 2s in that particular concept and the teacher feels that they're making adequate progress on the report card, then the teacher signs off to confirm that everything that we're seeing on the LPAC and the comparison of basic English skills is verified with the work that they're doing in the classroom. And if all 3 of those points are met, then the final step is that we contact the parents to consult. We call it a consultation because we call the family or contact the family to explain the reclassification process, the different points of criteria that the student met. And then we also then essentially we need permission from the parent to be able to reclassify them. So if a parent feels that based on what we share, the student they still see needs with language support for the student, then that's a conversation that we can have as to whether we hold off on the reclassification. However, I can share that in my 12 years as a principal, I don't think I ever had a parent not approve of the reclassification based on all the criteria. And I think in most cases, parents are excited, about the fact that their students have met the criteria and are progressing very well in their English language development. For a secondary school, so middle school and high school, we have very similar criteria. The only difference is that for that second point there are a few more options for the student to demonstrate the proficiency in the comparison of basic skills, but we're still looking for that in addition to the teacher evaluation, which would be a C or higher in language arts, and then also the parent consultation piece there. So a few more opportunities for the students for that second criteria point to meet at the high school level. If all of the first three criteria points are met, then we again consult with the parent, and then we move forward with reclassifying if the parent is in agreement with the report and the recommendation for reclassification. So if a student meets those criteria and we have the consent of the parent and we'll move forward with reclassifying the student, the process doesn't stop there. We want to make sure that students are able to continue demonstrating the success that they've demonstrated to that point in their language development. So schools will monitor students for 4 years after they've been reclassified to assure that they're continuing to move forward. The reclassification monitoring process happens 1 to 2 times a year. What will happen is that after the students reclassify, the teachers will create a goal for, I believe they actually have the opportunity to create 1 to 3 goals for that student to continue developing. And then that will be the focal point of the monitoring for the very next period. So the teacher, even though the student has been reclassified, the teacher may recommend a goal to continue developing to write more complex sentences, perhaps. And so when the student is monitored for the next period, then they'll be looking specifically at that skill and how that's developed in the couple of months to the year that goal has been established. In addition, we review SBAC scores. We look at their grades. We look at writing assessments that they're taking to ensure that all of that is also looking good and progressing. And continue to move forward. If for any reason the student isn't making progress, then during those reclassification monitoring periods, the teacher or the school administrator, they'll work together to ensure that we put a plan in place to support the student. So again, if the student just for whatever point gets stuck at where they are and isn't showing progress after 1 or 2 monitoring periods, then interventions will be put in place to make sure that we help that student move forward. If you are the parent of an English learner who has been reclassified, we encourage you to ask your child's teacher about their reclassification monitoring status, because again, it doesn't end a reclassification. We want to make sure that the students are continuing to be supported, that goals are being set and they're continuing to be supported. If you're not sure what your child's status is with regard to reclassification or how close they are to it, again, also encourage you to ask, beginning with your child's teacher, ask about their status. Are they close to being reclassified? What, if any, of the criteria have they met? We have had students reclassify as early as first grade, first and second grade. Sometimes the students may take a little bit longer depending on their language development. So it's possible that they may reclassify after elementary school, somewhere in middle and high school. The English language assessment that is the first criteria point does become a little bit more complex as they move up in the grades. So the earlier the better. Then they also have more access to, more flexibility in their schedules as they move into middle or high. But everybody will develop at their own pace. They develop those skills, as they go. But definitely asking those questions so that you know exactly where your child stands and how close they are to reclassification would be a good point for you to then be able to continue those conversations with your child's teachers. I do want to just point out that students who have an IEP or a Section 504 plan must be provided those instructional supports as written into their plan, as well as their 504 plan. So during general instruction, during English language development instruction, the accommodations that they have identified or written into their plan should be provided to the student as they're working towards English proficiency. Some of our English learner students may also have IEP goals for language acquisition that are written into their IEPs, and these should also be discussed and reviewed annually to make sure that the student is progressing. So I know there was a lot of information with regard to English learner identification, the instruction that's provided, to support them with the language development. and the reclassification. But I hope that at least that we were able to provide a little bit of information that perhaps was new, or at the very least that prompts some questions for you to think about, to consider, to research further, and to discuss with your school sites. Again, specifically so that you know where your child stands with regard to their language development journey over the course of the year. So if they're brand new kindergarten student with us, it's never too early to begin asking those questions. If they've been in our system for a couple of years and still haven't reclassified, and again, do encourage you to discuss with your child's teacher. Again, how are they progressing towards reclassification? What are the supports that are being provided at the school site if they're, if it's been a few years and they haven't reclassified yet, or if you feel maybe they're not progressing, or the teacher sees that they're not progressing. Again, it's always good to open up that conversation and make sure that you are aware of what supports they're receiving, or perhaps how you might even be able to support at home. Sometimes there might be some skills and strategies they can practice at home to help support what's happening in the classroom as well. So if you have any questions about English language development, again, I would definitely start with, specific to your student, I would definitely start at the school site. But if you have general questions, I'd be happy to answer those or point you in the direction of where you can get a response if needed. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if there are any, feel free to drop them in there, and I'm happy to answer them again, or point you in the direction of where that information can be found. We will be having another presentation on English learners as we approach the English language proficiency assessment California window. And I believe we have it scheduled for either late January or very early February, since the window will be opening up in February through May for that assessment. So in that presentation, we focus a little bit on the assessment itself, just what it looks like, provide some resources for families to review on their own, or to perhaps have students practice with, so they become familiar with the type of question and structure of the language assessment, how they'll be assessed, and the types of questions that they may come across as they are getting ready to begin that assessment in the spring. And with that, if there are no questions, I want to thank you all for joining us and for taking time to log in. We had a smaller group here today, but again, I hope that the information was informative and you're able to take the information to take back and generate some questions that you can have a conversation with your teachers about, so you know how your students are progressing with their English language development.